All American Savage Show podcast. I'm your host, John Burke. We have a special guest with us in the studio. Well, not in the studio, via Skype. I always make the mistake of saying that. We got Colonel Stuart here today. I know that you're a very busy man. You just came off your book tour, and I appreciate you coming on the show today, especially given the conditions of how we've talked in the past. But what I'd like to do real quick is to introduce you as to why you rose to prominence, because I feel it has a very prolific input on why we're having this conversation today.
Yeah. So my name is Stuart Scheller. I was a Marine Corps infantry officer for 17 years, and I was thrust in the media in August 26 last year. I made a video where I listed some mistakes that I saw of my senior leaders and asked for accountability of my senior leaders. Following that, I was fired from my battalion commander job, and I felt like bullied, and I had a choice whether to apologize and limp towards my retirement for the next 3 years or continue to make statements and try to force what I felt like the institution to address the content of my statements. And so the situation escalated after that. I continued to make statements. It ended with me going to jail for a little bit and then being court-martialed, and I ended up resigning short of my retirement. And then I got out of the Marine Corps Christmas Eve of last year, so a little less than a year ago. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've been on a bunch of media talking about my side of the story. I ended up writing a book, and as just described by John, I just finished my book tour and kind of winding down for the holidays. I'll probably reemerge in January next year, trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
Your career, you made it to colonel, so you'd actually, how long did you actually spend in the Marine Corps?
17 years, almost to the day.
Retirement's 20, correct? Because I sure Army Marines are the same. So you decided to step up because you generated a lot of eyes on your character. Because you were, honestly, man, to be honest with you, you were the only officer that I actually saw, because I'd heard of you. You were the only officer that I seen stand up and say, we need accountability. This is just what has happened is atrocious. This should not go without being investigated, and somebody should be punished. You were the only one that stood up and did that, like realistically speaking, and it was just such a breath of fresh air to actually see officer leadership, even though it wasn't the Army, officer leadership grab their nuts and say, no, this isn't right. And you literally, and I hate to say this, but you are the classic example of what happens when you stand up to fight the system, that people will sit there and challenge you and say, well, if you stay in, you change it. That's not the fact. When you have leadership in charge that's so high up the echelon, you can't change anything because it's a Pentagon level.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. So, this conversation will evolve, but that's, I think, kind of, as this conversation goes forward, why I have taken some of the stances I've taken recently, because everyone, when I made that stand, wanted to attack me with 100 different things. And the one thing that never came out was anything inappropriate or bad in my past. So just imagine the amount of people trying to discredit me and find something wrong. And it turns out, at the end of the day, I'm a pretty good person. I was a pretty decent leader. My career was very successful up to that point. Mm-hmm. And despite all the narratives that were out there, and you also got to keep in mind, I was legally unable to address a lot of the content that was coming out about me. And so I was watching some of these versions of truth. I was watching some of these just factually incorrect things that were said about me. Mm-hmm. And it just really opened my eyes to how the media works, how the military has weaponized the media in a lot of ways. And it was tough for me. And so I appreciate you saying that. And, I got through it. And, like most of us, we talk private message. I think a lot of us have different opinions, but at the same time, we're all passionate. And I'd like to think we're all trying to move in the same direction. Mm-hmm. So sometimes a lot of these conversations can boil over into frustration. And I'm not above that. That's happened to me against certain people. But at the same time, I do believe we all want to fight for America and make this a better place. And, especially us that have served, it's even maybe a little bit more personal, which is why it was so hard for me, after 17 years, all my experiences and everything I've done for America, for everyone to say that I was this extremist and it was politically motivated or was financially motivated, and just all these things that just were factually incorrect. It was hard. It was definitely a challenging situation.
It's sadly not a very uncommon position to take, and to hear the things you just described, that's not uncommon whatsoever. And I feel like even when I served, I got out in 2016, and it was the exposing to how the MSM was actually weaponized by the government. Regardless of which political party is in place, you do see the MSM become certain mouthpieces for certain individuals. And like they say, the first casualty of that is truth. So to see the character assassination they launched at you, yeah, because I think think I'd say stuff like, yeah, he's serving in the brig because he's a criminal. And even, there were so many of us, especially in the military meme community, that were like, this guy's a hero. I was like, forget being under fire. This guy just threw away 17 years of blood, sweat, and tears to stand for what was actually right, what was truthful and honest. And that's why it resonated in so many veterans' hearts to see you take that stand. And so that brings us to the next point, which is the reason why you're here. And by the way, Tony Cowden really speaks very highly of you. Tony reached out to me. He's like, I know Stu, he's a good man. So, and I never bring people on here to attack them. What happens on social media happens on social media. But when somebody comes on this show, I'll always give them a platform to air their side of the story, and I'm never going to try and be biased. So with that being said, we turn to Jr Majewski, I believe his name is. Jr Majewski, and I'm going to paint the picture real quick. Had conducted an interview where basically he kind of lied by omission in regards to where his service had led him. He claimed he had served in Afghanistan. I'm sure you heard the interview. I have the audio bite if you need me to play it. I don't think I need to. And in said interview, Majewski really led people to believe that he had actually served in a combat role in Afghanistan. I'd even been messaged by Jr Majewski, and he confirmed he reached too far. He went way too far. He apologized and said he was going to essentially recant, make an apology. And this was after the veteran community turned on him hard. Especially in the military meme community, which I know you're familiar with. You've blocked a few of them, which a few of them are like, dude, unblock me, I want to talk to him. These guys I know personally, some of which have served in Ranger regiments, ODAs across the world. And these guys really take these things in regards to stolen valor very seriously. For civilians that might be listening, stolen valor is I think the only thing worse than stolen valor is like cowering under fire, quite honestly. And Majewski was accused of this. The military meme community went after him, and it wasn't because of what his service was, which was technically he was stationed in Qatar. He worked in the Air Force and did a honorable position, not talking bad about that whatsoever, but that they attacked him for trying to essentially, lying through omissions, make it out as if he was a trigger puller when he was not. Has anything I've said so far, do you deem to be incorrect?
No, I think the debate here, I think everyone agrees that he served in Qatar on whatever that squadron was. Mm-hmm. The question is whether he flew in and out of Afghanistan from Qatar. That's the $1 million question.
No, he said yes. Later on, he confirmed. He said, yeah, I flew supply missions into Bagram and then right back out. Never did he squeeze the trigger. Never did he go outside the wire. And I don't mean this in the context of like looking down my nose at non-combat MOSs, because again, we all know you as a colonel, you know the cogs of the machine that are needed to make this thing turn. But when you present yourself, especially when you are running for Congress as a veteran, and you embellish your service, you've essentially started your career, your potential political career out on a lie already. And the veteran community did not appreciate that. So that's where you came in. And I guess, I don't know how you and Majewski, I'll let you take it from here and you tell your side of the story. And then I want to kind of weigh in on what the veteran community saw.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with what you said about blocking certain people. And so yeah. I'm cool with somebody having a different opinion. Mm-hmm. And any type of intelligent discourse on my social media post, mm-hmm. I will never block you. So if anyone got blocked, like I didn't block you and you said some personal things about me, mm-hmm. and I kind of let that roll off my back. I mean, there's a lot of people that have things to say about me. If I blocked you, it's because it was just straight up personal attacks and there was no intelligent discourse. And even on some of those, I came back and unblocked them when they mm-hmm. said they wanted to have a debate. So
I did see that, yeah.
If there's somebody that's blocked that wants to have an intelligent debate, like I'm all for it. Like there's other people with different opinions, mm-hmm. and I acknowledge that. Like I came on this show today knowing that we had a different opinion on this, mm-hmm. but I did it because, as I told you in a message, just because we have different opinions doesn't mean that we can't have a debate. And I asked myself, like, coming on here, am I going to change John Burke's opinion? Probably not. Mm-hmm. But it's important to me to come on the shows and show people that I may have a different opinion, but I'm brave enough to have a discourse. And so I've had disagreements with other people, and I've asked them to have debates similar to this, and then they avoid it, right? Mm-hmm. And so I guess my opinion was, if I'm going to have a different opinion, I'm going to at least have the discourse. I may not change your mind, mm-hmm. but I think I'm entitled to have a different opinion. And when you're just personal attacks consistently, you're probably going to get blocked. Mm-hmm. And so I'd ask anyone that wants to have a debate with me, just, if you got a show like John does and you want me to come on and have a different opinion, happy to do that. But what I'm not going to do is just entertain personal attacks when there's not a lot of intelligent discourse. So that's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, Jr Majewski. Yeah, so I am from Ohio, and my whole platform was supporting veterans running for Congress. And so I supported a bunch of different people, and I started to notice across the board how veterans service could be attacked. Another candidate, before I get to JR, was General Don Bolduc. This is a guy, a one-star, that served 10 deployments to Afghanistan, very much a trigger puller. It was commanded all special forces in Africa. He was winning the Republican primary, and the Republicans ran a $4 million hit campaign, which is public information, calling him a terrorist. And so I'm looking at the battlefield of politics, and I'm pretty much an apolitical guy. I'm a conservative, but my position was just supporting veterans. And when I see someone like Don Bolduc called a terrorist by the own party that he was running in, I feel like that's a discredit to all of veterans across the community. And so it's like, what am I trying to fight for? And I'm not just fighting for trigger pullers. I mean, all of the military is maybe 1% of the population. And I feel like oftentimes veterans that are successful are attacked by other veterans more so than any of the other population. And if we as a veteran community can come together and apply pressure on places like the Senate Armed Forces Committee, half of them don't have any military experience, right? Mm-hmm. And the ones that do have military experience, it's maybe 4 years at most. If you were to add up all of the Senate Armed Forces Committee military experience, it wouldn't surpass what General Bolduc had. Mm-hmm. But because General Bolduc was a Trump supporter and kind of like a branded like a MAGA guy, he made some comments about the election was stolen, that he walked back, which, like.
Okay, I just want to push pause real quick. You are shifting focus away from Jr Majewski. I get what you're talking about as far as your point here, and yeah, I get it. That's honestly, I've been doing this for 7 years. Welcome to politics. I don't agree with it. I think it's one of the most ridiculous. We've been called domestic terrorists. I get your point there, but this isn't about him. We have to take it isolated issue by isolated issue. Jr Majewski fabricated or he embellished the service, and I do want to go back to the blocking issue you talked about. No one's questioning your level of commitment, your honor. You've clearly served in the Marine Corps for a very long time. You didn't make it to that rank being a shitbag. No one's questioning your, honestly, your guts. I certainly appreciate you coming on here because it does take a lot of guts. We have a lot of listeners to this show. But what I do focus on is I just want the truth. And honestly, I don't want to kind of frame this conversation with the intent of changing anyone's opinion. I just want the truth. Now, when Jr Majewski announced, when he did that interview, he came back and he told the military meme community, and the way I know the military meme community is essentially when somebody does something and what he did, they're going to leave comments to get your attention. And then if you don't go back and fix your screw up, then they're going to come after you. They've done it to me. They've held me. This is a community that does a lot of good in the veteran space because they hold leaders accountable. And they've changed a lot of things out there, especially in the terms of sexual harassment and assault in the military. But the point that I want to go back to is that where there's smoke, there's fire. The overwhelming majority of these various men and women that I know personally, when they come together and the consensus is this guy is lying. This is not right. This should be held accountable. This does need to be aired out and I had a conversation with him. He DM'd me, and I respected him for that. And I told him, I was like, Junior, here's the deal. Just say you screwed up, apologize like a man, and we will back you, man. We'll back you 100%. We all screw up. I get it. Like, everybody wants to be that frontline trigger puller. Everybody wants to be that Green Beret, that Spec Ops Chris Kyle. I get it, man. I said, but the reality of it is, be prideful in what you actually did. But he didn't do that. And then you endorsed him. Now, did you know at the time? Well, I assume you did because you made a post defending Junior. And in that post, you did what you spoke how you just kind of did. And this idea of uniting the veteran community. We shouldn't attack each other. That's not what happens. That's not what's happening now. He lied. He should be held accountable, make amends, and move on. That's all this is about. So I don't want to go down this road of this other colonel that was attacked. And that has no bearing on this conversation whatsoever.
Yeah, all right. So I was laying the groundwork to say, everything that you just said there. Mm-hmm. So I didn't endorse him like I did when I was running with him. I'd like to think as a man, I don't know the facts of everyone. I'm with him. I'm supporting a veteran. Mm-hmm. An AP article came out that mm-hmm. challenged his combat veteran status and whether he had been to Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. He came out in a press conference. He didn't apologize. He said, I've been to Afghanistan. I think I rate the combat veteran moniker, and I have been to Afghanistan. And so the post that I made was, there is ways to find this information. And so my problem was when the AP article came out, everybody was immediately throwing him under the bus. And I started with what I went through. The media has an agenda, right? And so when the Air Force, even in that AP article, said there's no way to confirm whether JR has been in Afghanistan or not, there was a second article that came out from the National File that said that they had talked to other people in his unit and that they validated they had gone to Afghanistan, but there was an anonymous source. I actually called that guy, that that author of that article, and I said, hey, nobody wants anonymous sources. And even if it was not anonymous, and like his, Jr Majewski's friend came out and used his name, still that's not definitive proof. We still don't have definitive proof whether he flew in Afghanistan or not. And
well, he also said that his DD-214 was classified.
Yeah, but I guess the DD-214 is not going to say. So the guy deployed to Qatar in May of 2002. In 2002, we just started Afghanistan. So do I know if JR flew from Qatar to Afghanistan? I honestly don't. The post that I made was essentially saying there's ways to find this out. So rather than when that AP article came out and everyone reacted, my point was the Air Force PAO, probably a major, that said there's no way to find out. That's not true. There are command chronologies, I've written many of them, that go to archives of military institutions. And in those archives, you could find the commander of that squadron. And a good journalist could go back to that squadron commander and ask, how many missions did his unit fly from Qatar to Afghanistan? So my point wasn't, hey, JR's not lying. My point was, we don't have enough information to know if he flew from Afghanistan or not, and to immediately damn a veteran based on incomplete information, based on everything that I went through, I felt like was misguided.
Well, when JR did that initial interview, the anonymous source, and I know the reporter you're talking about that wrote that AP article, they didn't just pull that out of the ether. There was grounds for investigation based upon what JR himself had actually said. Then the investigations began, and then JR started making some very weird statements that were like, wait, something's not I mean, you know when you hear a stolen valor case and they start saying some things that don't add up. Come on. I was in Iraq in 2003. I was already serving in 2001. I was in the initial push in 2003. Our DD-214s reflected accordingly right off the bat. I mean, I hate to admit that, but that was one thing the Army did get right as far as the actual paperwork that went into the deployment statuses and things such as that. But there hasn't been a DD-214 yet that I've seen, and I know a lot of Spec Ops guys, where deployment locations was ever redacted or classified. I haven't seen it. Never saw that.
I looked at that document too. Like, I agree that that's weird and it makes your eyebrow raise. But
so then you can understand why the veteran community, and I say this, and I still think there's a lot of veterans that deservingly so do respect you. You have a lot of pull in the veteran community. You're the only dude that had the guts enough to stand up and say, here am I. So when you did this, the perception across the board, it wasn't that people just instantly wanted to jump on Majewski. They wanted to jump onto you. But the veteran community is very good at gatekeeping, because we've seen, and I hate to say this, we've seen the Crenshaws. We've seen some people come out there from our community. I like Crenshaw as a man. I don't agree with him politically on a lot of stuff. But we feel like there have been people in the veteran community that have went out there in the political spectrum to accurately represent the veteran space, and then they just flip. And it's like, we're tired of it. We're tired of it. And it hurts. It really does hurt, because we don't have a lot of good combat veterans with their mouth on the freaking in Congress's ear. So when this hit, it was just like, damn, this stung. Like, even I knew who you were, dude. And I was like, nah, there's no way. And then I saw the post, like, oh, God damn it.
So Tony Calden, you brought him up earlier. I don't know, like, your guys' relationship, but I think he was talking to you, and he called me. And Tony
He's been on the show.
Hey,
Tony's a good dude.
Tony was like, hey, Stu, like, I love you. You got to back away from this. And I guess my position was exactly what I just said. I like to look at the facts and understand them. And where I really want to jump in is when everyone moves out in one direction without all the facts. And that's what I told Tony. Like, it says classified. Like, that is super weird. Completely agree. But as I'm not a handwriting expert. As I look at it, the rest of it, the top of it is written in the same handwriting. And it was some Army specialist from the administration department. So, like, I don't know if some E3, if JR is pulling the documents out, if some E3 in the Air Force just wrote that on there, does it seem weird? Absolutely. Are there deployments on a DD-214 that aren't on there? I have them. Like, I was in Egypt during the revolution there, where al-Sisi, challenged and imprisoned the president, and I had to get evac. Like, that's not on my DD-214. So, like,
Okay, fair enough.
I just looked at it and said, is there weird things? Should JR have said, like, I wasn't a trigger puller, I wasn't in the front lines? Like, Yeah, agreed.
Mm-hmm.
But to say he's not a combat veteran, that's like I don't know. I pause with that because if he was in Afghanistan, like that's a separate debate. A guy that flew in and out of Afghanistan on an airfield, is he a combat veteran? Like by the definition, he is. But like I understand your point, and everybody wants somebody to be honest. Like I'm brave enough to say if the information came out and like that squadron commander, a journalist actually reached out to him and said, did you guys run missions to Afghanistan? Which I told that national file guy to do, and he just never followed up.
Mm-hmm.
If he came out and said, yeah, we never ran missions to Afghanistan, like I would think that I'm man enough to come up and say, hey, I was wrong. But at the same time, like my position has never been, he's telling the truth. My position has been, we don't have enough information to completely damn him. And it's frustrating to me when everybody just assumes based on an AP article that may have an agenda without all the information.
So you're saying the post that you made on your Instagram page where you basically you tiptoed around it. It was like it was almost like a Martin Luther King Jr. speech. Like I have a dream, we're veterans, and it was very well worded. I'll give it to you. Like I love journalism. I love reading. It's just, but when I read that, I was like, this has the makings of a very good Martin Luther King Jr. for the Veterans Space speech. I have a dream where veterans don't attack veterans. Where we can, bro, I've been there with. I know veterans love attacking other veterans, and that is a whole different debate in regards to the toxicity in the veteran community. But I don't feel like that's applicable in this situation. But I do like your point as far as going down the rabbit hole of what qualifies somebody as being a combat veteran, and I think by and large, civilians don't understand the meaning behind that. They just think that if you were over in Afghanistan, you're automatically a combat veteran. And there's a difference between somebody who served in a combat theater versus somebody that was on the front lines engaged in the actual fighting, in which we all know asymmetrical battlefield over there was a 360 degree. But even still, but I want to go back to that point though. JR even DM'd me and said, yeah, I was wrong. I intentionally did it. And then the other thing that really put the nail in his coffin, which I have never seen this happen. This was really mind-blowing to me. A good buddy of mine, the 18 Alpha Chronicles over on Instagram. I'm sure you know him. I think he follows you. And he's probably had some good, he's a good dude. He's someone that you definitely want to talk with. He brought up the fact that Junior's uncle that he posted about, who was supposedly a Navy SEAL, he posted on his Instagram, and his uncle during the Vietnam era in his SEAL uniform has about 3 unauthorized chins. I've never seen a Vietnam era fat Navy SEAL. They did some investigating. He was stolen valor too. So naturally,
I don't know anything about this. So, like,
that's
intelligently
okay.
Comment on this.
Okay, so that's why I'm trying to think, or I'm trying to come to the conclusion that, do you think maybe you saw, because you said you want to help veterans run? Noble, commendable. I don't. I want to help good candidates run. If they're a veteran, outstanding. I want that. But by the virtue of being a veteran does not mean I'm going to throw my support behind you. And I'm not saying that in a negative connotation or a negative light. Do you think maybe you jumped the gun on endorsing Junior without really fully knowing everything about him?
No. I mean, There's no way you.
I gave you a way out there, man. That was the way out. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm glad you're honest. I'm glad you're honest.
The bottom line is I'm out there supporting people that, I don't agree with you. I want good candidates too. Like some of my favorite politicians aren't veterans at all. So like at no point did I say I don't want the best candidate. Like I do want the best candidate, but a lot of my platform has been advocating for veterans. I am just a guy who takes the information that I have and analyzes it, and then I'll endorse them. Is there information that could come to light after the fact that would change my thinking? Absolutely. If I found out Jr Majewski was lying after the fact, would that change my mind? Yes, it would. But I can't live my life thinking like I have to know all the information about a person before I endorse them. I look at the information that I have, I do what I can to help them, and then if the situation changes, I update my analysis of the situation. So, like hindsight's always 20/20. It's like the same thing that I went through in my ordeal. People are always like, you made all these mistakes, and it's like, absolutely I did. But when you're in the situation, like you can just sit on the sideline and not do anything and protect yourself so that you don't receive criticism, or you can get in the arena and fight. And I was in the arena fighting. I supported a candidate in Northern Ohio, my home state, that was a veteran. Other information came out, and my statements after the fact were, let's wait until we figure out what is actually going on here. And I still can't tell you definitively if he's been in Afghanistan or not. Like you said, he DM'd you. I've talked to him on the phone multiple times. He has been very adamant that he has flown in and out of Afghanistan.
Oh, that's not the question. No, I agree. He probably did fly in and out of Afghanistan. He said that was his job. That was his, that was his specialty. That's not what's on the table here. Again, it's the perception that he created that, again, in the interview. Here, let me just play this for you real quick, because, again, I feel like this needs to be listened to, because Jr Majewski made no buts about it. He lied about his service. Listen to his interview right here.
How many tours?
1 second.
Did you serve in Afghanistan?
Yes, I did.
How many tours?
One.
What year were you there? What years?
2002, 2003.
Wow, so you served right at the beginning.
Okay, so that right there, he wasn't stationed in Afghanistan. He was stationed in Qatar. He did fly supply missions.
Can you tell me the context of that interview?
The guy was, this is, I think, before he announced he was running for Congress. This is on an interview. 18 Alpha.
I've never heard that.
Really?
Yeah.
18 Alpha posted on his Instagram. I assumed you'd seen it, or maybe you tagged it. No, that was Jr Majewski conducting an interview, and that is what created the stir and the controversy, which led to the AP investigating his claims, because a lot of veterans came forward saying, no, this guy is lying. This is not what he did. This is where it started. This is what it started from. And then again, the classification of the DD-214, and then he DM'd me. Stu, I can send you the screenshot where he even said, I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize. I was like, dude, water under the bridge. Cool. You're forgiven in my book. I know we kind of get hyped up. I think he had the best intentions. He wanted to go over there and change things for Ohio. But I would much rather have a Democrat that I know is my enemy, that I'm probably going to disagree with, than a conservative, a rhino in name. Well, I shouldn't even say rhino. I'd just say a lying veteran conservative who I don't know if that guy's telling me the truth or not, because he already started his campaign on a fundamental lie. And that's a very serious lie. This isn't like, oh, did I say a racist joke in the packs? Versus like, dude, I'm lying about something that's very serious to, quite honestly, a large amount of supporters from my voter base.
Yeah, I mean, that interview right there, should he have apologized for overreaching and saying he served in Afghanistan? Like, he flew in and out of Afghanistan.
Commendable, yeah.
Yeah. And so, the AP article that says he wasn't a combat veteran or hadn't been to Afghanistan because it was on his DD-214, I mean, those were the statements that I made. I was like, hey, I don't have enough information to say that he hasn't been to Afghanistan, so I'm not quick to damn him. And that was my position. And you know what? Like, if JR came out tomorrow and said he hadn't been to Afghanistan, or if his squadron commander came out and said we never flew missions to Afghanistan, I would change my position. But, I still believe that he flew in and out of Afghanistan, and I believe that the combat veteran, I don't get all upset if he uses the term combat veteran. Now, saying he served in Afghanistan, that's probably something he should have backed away from, but, that's where we're at.
That's exactly what this whole ordeal has been about. And again, it's not about him flying into Afghanistan. Everybody actually believes him on that. Again, it's just the passing off.
What I'll also say, though, is the press conference that he gave, nobody asked about that. They were asking, the questions they asked him, and that's what I watched, was the press conference he gave after this AP article came out, was that he had flown in and out of Afghanistan, and he was stationed in Qatar, and that he was a combat veteran. And that no one was like, well, you said before you ran in politics that you served in Afghanistan, right? So it's like, I don't know.
But you can see the picture now, because I could have swore you'd seen that interview, but now that you're exposed to different information, and I'll send you the video if you want to see it firsthand, because it's literally him talking to this guy during the interview. And like I said, this is what basically threw the fire, or was the smoke before the fire, and everybody started investigating. And again, Junior could have got in front of it. He could have just said, yeah, screwed up. Sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. He knew what he was doing. And the DMs he sent me, Stu, it's ridiculous. He clearly admitted it. I even published the DMs. I was like, look, and I wasn't going to do that at first. I wanted to give him enough time to where it's like, look, and he even said, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to make this right. I was like, bro, I'll back you then. 100%. I was like, that's a great position to have. That's what a real man does. When you screw up, hey, man, I screwed up. I'm throwing myself on the mercy of the court. Forgive me. He didn't. He doubled down. And it does matter in the long term because Trump endorsed him. Trump endorsed him, and the veteran community saw Trump's blind endorsement, and therefore the secondary and tertiary effects of that are now veterans within the GOP are going to say, well, Trump endorsed the dude that's basically stolen valor. So either Trump doesn't care or Trump doesn't know what's actually going on, and he's just throwing around blind endorsements. Therefore, any candidate that he supports, realistically, we don't know if that guy is a Trump guy or if he's just endorsing him for whatever reasons. So these things do have secondary and tertiary effects that maybe aren't seen on the surface level, but deep down below in the veteran space, it has massive effects.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're kind of saying the same thing now.
Okay.
Like, if he said he served in Afghanistan, and I was doing Stu Scheller was doing the press conference, I'd have come out and been like, hey, I flew in and out of Afghanistan. Me saying I served in Afghanistan was an overreach, but I have flown in and out. I am a combat veteran by my understanding of it. I understand I wasn't a trigger puller. Like, I agree with you that would have been a better way to handle that press conference.
Well, I'm glad. I shouldn't say I'm glad. At least now, hopefully, you've got another side of the story. So maybe you can, just think about it and give it consideration. Because honestly, dude, you still got a lot of support out there, and the track record you're going, you're bringing a lot of issues in front of important people, and that's what we need more of. So I do appreciate you coming on the show. So now that we got that out of our way, what are you doing now?
I finished the book tour. I kind of started with, I don't know what I'm going to do turn of next year. There's a lot of people that want me to go into politics. And quite honestly,
you kind of already have. You kind of already have.
Yeah. I mean,
you got a taste of it.
I hate politicians. I hate politics. It's just, to your point, I look at all these other people and I just want good, honest, authentic people. And I don't get a lot of that out of my current leaders, but it's so draining. Like, I physically, spiritually, mentally, like everywhere I'm going, it takes a lot out of me. I think I'd prefer to just be a farmer, to be honest with you. But at the same time, it's like, I want to be a part of the fight. I'm passionate about making America a better place. And so to be continued, man. I haven't figured it out.
You got a taste of what politics are. I mean, essentially, they've already thrown everything they've got at you, and you're still standing. So that's a testament to you. I mean, you'd still have a lot of support, especially in the veteran space, and you got a lot of big names backing you because we see the interviews you do and the podcasts you go on. It's definitely something to consider. But as far as the book tour, what was this book about? As far as what happened with you basically standing up for your beliefs?
Yeah, so the book, it's the first half of it is my 17 years where I essentially outline where I thought the military has gone off track for the last 2 decades and through my experiences. And then the second half.
If you don't mind, I want you to, can you elaborate on that? Because that's something that I have pushed a long time back in 2016 when I got out, was the turning of the Obama administration and how it basically started going down. What is your opinions on that? Because I feel like a lot of people need to hear that from experienced veterans, especially in officer corps.
Yeah, 100%. I actually just did an episode called Modern Warriors. It's on Fox Nation with Pete Hegseth. And we talked about exactly that. And, President Obama came in and said that he wanted all races, genders, ethnicities to have a equal representation in the military. And on the surface, everybody agrees with that. No one disagreed. But the question under the surface was one of standards. So what are the standards? We want everyone to be able to go out and try out for the standard. But the analogy I make in the book is like the NBA and the WNBA. The WNBA is equal opportunity. It's not equality. If it was equality, all of those players would try out for the same team. Now, imagine hypothetically a basketball game that's played and one team gets to pick all the best players and one team reserves spots for every gender, ethnicity, sexual identity, and they play each other and the losing team gets killed because that's the outcome in war. And if you had to stake your child in the outcome of that game, which team would you pick, right? And so when President Obama came, I was a major at the time working at the basic school where we create military occupational specialties for young officers. And so it's very important because in the general officer ranks, at least in the Marine Corps, statistically, you can look at it, there are less minorities and females in the general officer ranks. And so you can make the critical race theory is that the system is inherently racist. You can make the argument based on stats that the system is inherently racist based on there's not as many general officers. But the deeper problem, like if you actually analyze this, general officers are created from combat arms. And there wasn't a lot of females and minorities in combat arms. And so specifically where we created, the ground MOS contracts at the basic school, black officers weren't going into infantry. And when I asked them, like, why not? A lot of them said they wanted a marketable skill. So then it became this deeper conversation is it the military's responsibility to go into the homes of young families and change the thinking that if they go into the military, they should be pursuing a combat arm so that they're statistically more likely to go become a general officer. And so we were working through all of this. I was writing all these briefs for a panel called DACOITS, which is the Defense Advisory for Women in Combat. And the tension got so high that Ray Mabus came down to the basic school to talk about essentially women in combat roles, and he said exactly what President Obama's position was. Everyone's going to have an opportunity to serve, and everyone again agreed with that. But some captain was brave enough to ask the Secretary of the Navy Mavis, can you address standards? Will standards change? And he came back and said, standards won't change, but they will evolve. And then we were all more confused than when he came. And, so we've been struggling with this really since the Obama administration. Right now, I can say definitively in the infantry, the physical standards for males and females are different. Like, that's a fact. And so it's just, I think everyone wants one performance standard and, let the chips fall based on how that works. And that's kind of been my position.
You know as well as I do that if that actually went into effect, you're going to see an even further decrease of women in combat MOSs and arms and things such as that because, yeah, I see where you're going with that. It's very interesting that you actually had to deal with that firsthand because when I was a drill sergeant on the trail, literally the same thing. It was basically we were checking boxes. We have to make sure that we get a certain quota. This is before women were allowed in the infantry. And back then, I saw the weakening of standards, lowering of standards, and this is when Afghanistan was still kicking off. And it worried me. It really was a crisis of conscience that now, as drill sergeants, we're not training these kids up to the level they need to be trained to get over there and to be effective, much less when they get down to a team leader and we're handing that team leader a good finished product. It was the same thing. It was the idea of we need to lower the standards for the sake of equality, and it becomes literally an everybody gets a trophy thing. And I do like your example there of saying like it's like when one team fights the other and the loser dies, it's like, yeah, do you want to put your child in that position? I do want to move forward real quick. And I'm sorry for bouncing around, though, but I do want to pick your brain on this. What are your thoughts on what's going on with Ukraine and Russia?
Man,
if you weren't getting into politics, you sure are now.
This was fired into Poland scared me a tremendous amount, right? And so I think in the news today, they were saying that potentially they came from Ukraine. But like, who knows the reality, right? Like,
well, they said it was like an S-300. I know I was an infantry guy. I'm not a missile tech dude, but they said it was an S-300, which due to the actual range, like 150 kilometers, it couldn't have been Russia. So it was basically, in my mind, I was the same way. I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. Why is Russia, that's already in a stalemate with Ukraine, trying to pull NATO into this? So it's like, this is either somebody's trying to perpetuate this, or there was some kind of stupid Ukrainian privates who were like, uh-oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously still a very dangerous situation, but, I'm just frustrated by the amount of money that we've funneled into Ukraine. I do appreciate that we haven't thrown forces at it. But at the same time, Ukraine, even though Zelensky in the media a lot of times is painted as a hero, I was in Lebanon and Beirut in 2006, and Israel invaded Lebanon, and Hezbollah had dug tunnels. And even though Israel had overwhelming armament, Hezbollah took it to them. And Ukraine has had at least 5 years since the Crimea incident to build tunnels and have a defense, but they've really done nothing to prepare just because they've expected people like the United States to show up with $100 billion and all these assets to run a proxy war. And it's really frustrating when all the problems that we have here in the United States that we're continuing to allow this. Now, does the United States want to defend democracy? Yeah, I think we do. Is Putin the aggressor? Yeah, he is. And so it's a complicated situation, but if I was the president of the SecDef, I would be handling it differently than we are now.
How would you handle it?
I would force our European partners to step up. And as much as I don't want Vladimir Putin to destabilize the area, over the long term, if we're conditioning all our European and NATO partners that the United States is just going to throw $100 billion at every problem and they don't have to have any type of defensive system, then I think actually on the long-term scale, we're crippling people.
I can definitely agree with that. I do want to go back to the 2014 coup in Ukraine, where this is where a lot of people are kind of changing their mind. It doesn't make them Putin Apollo. Well, let me push pause on that. I know what year did you go in? Did you start serving?
January 05.
Okay, I was in 01, so we were the same time frame. Like coming up in my career, all we ever trained to fight before Iraq fully kicked off was the Big Red Bear. Everything was Russian geared, armor on armor. And then did it shock you to see what Ukraine via NATO, EU, USA did? But it still shocked you to see like the Big Red Bear does not have as big a claws as we thought?
I'll tell you, I always kind of knew, if people always talk about near-peer threats, I always knew Russia was never on the same page as China. They've got antiquated 80s style Soviet arms, but they do have some upgrade in their tanks, but they're still a very centralized system. I mean, And so, yeah, I guess to your point, I thought they maybe would be a little bit more effective. But at the same time, very easy to invade, much harder to hold, like you and I know, right? And so his last couple of campaigns, it was like a quick little insurgency in and out.
Georgia in 2008, yeah.
That's right. But when you actually are trying to invade and then hold and change the government, that's where the wheels come off the bus very quickly.
You would think America's learned its lesson in that aspect after what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. But no, I fully agree with you there. But it's like, I don't know if I really consider Russia the aggressor. I think Russia was provoked. The EU has been flexing on Russia for a very long time. The history of Ukraine is a very interesting one, and I feel like a lot of people didn't really know much about Ukraine prior to this. So this definitely woke up a lot of people, myself included. When this first kicked off, it's like, I don't really know much about the Ukrainian history. But then when you start doing some digging, and I definitely listened to a lot of lectures from Ukrainian experts back in 2014 and did a lot of educational reading on the coup and such, things started to change. And it just turned into, it's like, I don't pick a side on this one. I was like, look, it's all screwed up. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't want to, like, I'm with you. I don't want to send American men and women to go fight and die in some war that a previous administration helped facilitate back in 2014 in the long term. So that's where I feel like a lot of people are starting to veer towards, is saying they're starting to see that America does not need to be the babysitter of the world. We saw it in Vietnam. We saw it in various other countries, other various conflicts. And I feel like the American population, by and large, they're exhausted. They're exhausted of combat.
I agree with you. So Vladimir Putin, I read his, for lack of a better term, national security strategy back in 17 when I was at command and staff. So he published in 17. This was like 18, 19 when I read it. And it very clearly states, like through almost every page, that their imminent threat is NATO. And the expansion of NATO, and everything that they do is focused on NATO. Now, does Vladimir Putin have a antiquated style thinking for land grab? Yes, he does. He still wants to expand into the old, the Soviet Union. Yeah. And so he's using NATO as an excuse. But at the same time, we've given him some of those excuses. That being said,
I agree. I fully agree. America's got blood on its hand. I agree.
But I'll say, I think Putin's thinking hasn't evolved. Like in today's world. Damn. Shaping the beliefs of the people is maybe one of the most important things. I mean, look at us. Like, we're caught in an information technology world that like brings conversations, and how we shape people's beliefs is very important. And so by invading, like, look at Finland and Sweden, he polarized them. So he might have actually had the opposite effect of what he was originally trying to do. And so yeah,
those guys are just sitting there going, "Oh, please God, don't invade! Oh my God, just don't, please don't." Like, they're just like, just keep them focused on Ukraine. Don't fuck with us, please. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what you said earlier of it's all messed up. Like, why do we have to pick sides? That's actually a very mature response. Like, and not a lot of people can do that, but it's just messed up all the way around.
Well, it's like you said, we get sucked into this vast echo chamber, be it left, center, or right, and say, you have to pick a side. It's like, well, look, maybe if you actually put yourself in the shoes of a deployed soldier over there, you might take a second to pause and say, wait a minute, is this really worth fighting and dying for? And in my opinion, it's not. This is a Ukrainian issue, but again, America we got blood on our hands on this, and it's come from political elites, corrupted political elites for power grab, money grabs, and just come to find out, I'm sure you've seen the new FTX got exposed. Yeah. Essentially the big money laundering operation with the DNC in Ukraine. And it's just like, why do we want to fight for these people? Why do we want to fight for governments anymore?
It's sometimes very demoralizing when you look at all of the inappropriateness.
How did you respond when, I hate saying it this way, but it's the truth, when Afghanistan fell?
I mean, I was so mad, but I was trying not to be like that guy that like grabbed a beer can and just threw it at the TV. I was trying to make rational arguments as to why I was frustrated. Mm-hmm. And, I could go through the list, but just the list of decisions that were made is just, it was almost incomprehensible. I was so frustrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I felt like that definitely resonated through the veteran community as a whole when that actually happened. Again, to your credit, that's when you stepped up, and a lot of people were like, look at this dude. Like, nobody's heard of this guy. And then suddenly, boom, he's like got the world's attention. It's like, this is what we need. And then sadly, I think there's a lot of other officer and enlisted cowards that should have done the same. I think if people en masse would have stood up and said, no, this is, and I know that goes again. That's to describe for the civilian viewers what he did, essentially. Fuck, that's a very difficult position to take, because now you're going against all the training, and I will say it, the indoctrination that we go through is that you will follow an order whether or not you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, you will follow an order blindly because you have to have that in the military, especially as a team, especially as a small unit team or whatever you want to call it, like a platoon, company, grade, whatever. And you went against that thinking.
Yeah.
You stood up and said, I'm going against everything. And here's the other thing. You went against what you even teach your young Marines to do. And that was, that's a big testament to your character. And this, again, that's why when the whole junior thing was just like, dude, no, we can't lose this guy. Like, we must protect this dude at all costs.
I think I teach my young Marines that to try to do the right thing and use critical thought. And there's times where you just got to shut up and follow the rules. Obviously, I wasn't like a moral crusader because there's inappropriateness that you see everywhere. And I wouldn't have made it 17 years by always just running my mouth. But this was one of those where I couldn't remain complacent anymore. And in the military, if you're supposed to follow order, unless it's illegal, immoral, or unethical. Illegal is pretty easy. Those are written down. But the immoral or unethical, that's a subjective academic debate. Like I would argue General McKenzie evacuating military troops in the peak fighting season before he evacuated American citizens was immoral and unethical. And so like the debate rages on. And so it's, you just need to, you apply judgment sometimes. And that was one of those situations where I was like, look around.
What you just said though, and this is the thing that really scares me as a prior enlisted dude, when you got an officer that has had very expensive education, very extensive training. The officer corps has a very structured pipeline, much longer than enlisted. We literally just spit in a cup, they check our butthole, and we're serving. That's all there is to it. Officers, they actually vet you guys because essentially you got a lot of lives in your hands when you make these calls. You bring up what that general did, which is a tactical blunder that even the lowest ranking private would be like, oh, that's probably not a good idea, sir. And he did it anyway. So that leaves a lot of enlisted people to say, why do we have an officer corps? Because these guys have made some blunders and some massive, and I'm not saying enlisted don't either, but it's just like, and maybe I shouldn't have framed it in the sense of why do we have an officer corps, but it's like, why are these men allowed to continue serving and why are they not held accountable and tried for their crimes and for not following doctrine, quite honestly?
Yeah, I mean, it's a deeper question. Right now, there's no third arm of government like we have in the civilian world. So there's no judicial arm in the military. So the judicial arm is governed by them. So like when that suicide attack happened and we flew a drone strike and killed nothing but women and children, we investigated ourselves and said it was a mistake, but nobody's going to be held accountable.
My bad. Yeah.
Exactly. And then Congress, their lever of control is the budget, and they're too afraid to use the budget. Similar to kind of some of the same conversations we're having. So imagine a congressman that stands against the budget. I could see the veteran community or the American population in whole saying you don't support veterans.
Yeah.
But really what they're trying to do on the macro level is say you want $750 billion. I'm going to take $80 billion off the top unless you can give me 3 names that are accountable. So Congress doesn't use the budget because they feel the need to support the veterans in any cause. And then the commander-in-chief has never fired a general for warfighting capability. I mean, like, look at McChrystal. If you speak out in a Rolling Stone article, you can get fired. Ethical concerns, you get fired. But to fire someone for warfighting capability would reflect on the commander-in-chief. And so these guys are just left unchecked. And it's very frustrating. And I also say the reason these people get to the top without pushing back is a systemic failure. These subjective evaluations that we have in the military, it's less about your performance and more about getting your boss to like you. So when you condition someone over 40 years is what it takes to make a 4-star general, and you have literally conditioned and weeded out the people that don't just try to make their boss like them, but might be focused on other things like warfighting, they don't make it. And so what you ultimately get are the General McKenzies and the Carter Hams of Benghazi that follow orders no matter what in common sense moments where we need generals to exercise moral courage. They just don't do it.
I want to go ahead and wrap this interview up, but I do want to ask you one final question. And if you could change one thing about the Marine Corps right now, what would it be?
The promotion system. I would take away the subjective evaluation and make it performance-based. If I'm an infantry officer, I should have to perform against another infantry officer with 30 Marines in my platoon, and the winner gets promoted, not the person that makes their boss like them the most. And I would do that. If you're an F-15 pilot, go against another F-15 pilot. And so across the board, I would make it a performance-based system. And then I don't care if my boss doesn't like me. As long as I go out on the field and I perform, then that's how I should get promoted.
So that'll never happen. That makes common sense. Why would they ever do that? Colonel, where can they find you on social media and where can they find your book?
So my book is Crisis of Command. It's on Amazon. It can be found at all the places, Barnes & Noble, whatnot. And then I have a website called AuthenticAmericans.com. all my social media is tied to it, but all my social media is pretty much at Stuart Scheller. And before I get off, John, I'll just say, like, I know we had different opinions, man. You've been a true professional, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and just, talk, because I think we need more of that.
I agree. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes people to freaking fire some shots across the bow, because that's how I got Crenshaw's attention. So I got a lot, because I've had a lot of congressmen on the show. And unfortunately, that's what it usually has to resort to. But no, I will say it's a massive testament to your courage to come on a show where you're going to have somebody that's going to counter your opinion. And again, I'm happy that we could have this discussion. You definitely earned a follow on Instagram from me. And if you do decide to run the political arena, hit me up before you endorse anybody, please. Would you fucking hit me up? Colonel, it has been an absolute honor and a big thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks, brother.